Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Criswell. I'm a professor of English and folklore and the director of Native American Studies at the University of South Carolina in Lancaster. We're here today at the Native American Studies Center in Lancaster, South Carolina, where I'm joined by my colleague, doctoral candidate, and criminal justice professor, Deborah Rowell. And joining us today is the creative team behind Hulu's new true crime documentary, Blood and Myth, executive producer, James Dommek Jr., and director and executive producer, Kahlil Hudson. The documentary is based on the best-selling Audible original audiobook, Midnight Sun, and premieres September 4th on Hulu. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. It's a fascinating story. James, can you set up the premise of the documentary for those who might not have seen it?
Sure, it's an Indigenous true crime documentary that takes place above the Arctic Circle. It involves the Inupiaq people, which are the Alaskan Inuit, and it's true crime, but it's so much more than a true crime. It delves into folklore and native belief and the justice system and survival and all sorts of stuff. But at the heart of it, the heart of the story revolves around an Alaskan up and coming Alaskan Native actor turned fugitive named Teddy Kyle Smith.
Great, great. Well, let's talk about some of the details of the film. James, when did you first hear the stories of the Inukins, if I'm saying that right? Were your great grandfather's stories passed down in your family?
They were very prevalent growing up, and I was born and raised in Kotzebue. I lived there, all my formative years, and it's just in the air. It's a place of the world where people have to hunt and fish and live off the land, and so you're out in the backcountry quite a bit. And people just started having stories. So it wasn't just my family; it was everybody's families. It was all of my friends. It was all of their aunties and uncles and their grandparents. These are things we talked about. So it's always a fascination, especially up north.
Well, the follow-up to that, generally when we think about mythological little people like leprechauns or puka or even the Yashashuri of the Catawba Nation nearby us, they're generally tricksters and troublemakers. But are there stories of Inukins involved in violence and murder like this?
It's up north. There are many native tribes share the same folklore of little people, but in Alaska and especially up north, they're talked about as almost like real, like flesh and blood. And as you know, Inuit spanned across 4 countries. We're in Siberia, Alaska, Canada, and Greenland, and all of the Inuit collectively all have the same origin story of the little people of the Inukun. It's all the same from Greenland to Siberia. And this was all before books. This was all before the internet. This was all just word of mouth. And so to me, that's always just been fascinating. That part of me thinks that so many of our native cultures have the similar story of little people and big, tall, hairy people, because we're human beings aren't the only hominid that lived on Earth. There used to be 6 to 7 to 8 different types of human beings with Neanderthals and Denisovians and all that. So Floriensis and all that. I believe that all these native stories about these little people and these big, tall people all have to do with the collective genetic memory that at one point we weren't the only two-leggeds walking around. And I think that up north, it does feel like these stories were never really talked about as like myth. It was always just like something stole stuff from my camp. A lot of metal things would go missing from people's camp. Axes, knives, cast iron, very specific thing, fishing lures. And in our culture, it's very bad luck to steal from people's camps. So it was always kind of considered that it was maybe them. So.
Okay.
How did you navigate telling a story where the explanation of the main character, his belief in the Inukins, might be viewed by outsiders as bizarre, but as culturally rooted for locals? Did you consult cultural or legal experts on how the courts weigh beliefs like this?
Well, to me, that was a pretty interesting part of the story, right? It was like it went all the way to the courtroom where the jury wanted to convict, Teddy guilty but or guilty but insane, because he immediately started talking about his experience out there. As soon as the troopers got him into interview, he just started talking about what he happened out there. He could have talked about anything. He could have said, "Hey, I didn't kill my mom." He said, "Hey, I was acting in self-defense against the Buckle brothers." That's not what he talked about. He immediately started talking about his experience out there. And it was, to me, it was a very interesting aspect of the story to kind of to walk that line, because people from the outside looking in there, this is easy to write off, but people who have spent time up north and spent time in very wild places realize, like, maybe this isn't out of the realm of possibilities. So that was actually an interesting point to try to make with me. It wasn't a hindrance.
Kahlil, I believe you have Tlingit and Haida background. Are there little people like this in your tradition, or is that the same Inuktitut in your community's traditions?
Yeah, so I'm Tlingit which is a tribe in Southeast Alaska. So I'm on the opposite end of the state from Kotzebue, where James is from. Um, but we do have we don't have little people, but we have the Kushtaka, and Kushtaka are it's a shape shifting being that are in our stories. They what they do share, though, is there's kind of with Inuktitut, with little people, there's sort of a spectrum of beliefs, from these malevolent, like, kind of evil beings that do horrible things, to these beings, these experiences that people have where their lives have been saved. And it's similar with the Kushtaka. There's that spectrum of stories from bad to good. And I think, what that speaks to is this idea that, stories are meant to teach. They're meant to teach lessons. They're meant to save your life at times, and they're meant to keep you on the right path, right? They're supposed to literally keep you on the path, which is kind of the message of this film, right? Is stay on the path, remember who you are, stay connected with your identity. Otherwise, if you veer too far off the path, monsters await you.
Now, even though you had said originally that they wanted to do a guilty but mentally ill, Teddy got a 99-year sentence for this. Did you find any discussion, either in court or in the community, that questioned the fairness of the sentence or the proportionance of the sentence?
I talked to Teddy personally about it, off camera. When I first went out there to the prison by myself, he was telling me that he was in prison. It's a medium to maximum level prison in Alaska, middle of nowhere. And he was saying that he's in there for 99 years, and there are guys in there he's in there with, who actually have murdered people, and they're out in 20 years. And so at the end of the day, Teddy wasn't convicted of murdering anybody, but his actions were so violent and so dangerous to himself and the community that, I mean, if you point a gun at someone's chest and you pull the trigger, I think you should be in jail. I think that's a dangerous person. So, yeah.
Yeah. Does the length of the sentence reflect a belief by the justice system that he's beyond rehabilitation?
I think so. I think they just threw the book at him. I think they were trying to make an example out of him. He terrorized that village where he's from. That people have to hunt and fish and gather up in Alaska, and the time that he went off the rails in that village is the exact time of year people need to go out and hunt and get berries and get fish and get firewood. That village was locked down for 2 weeks, and that was in one of the most crucial parts of the year to go out and do this stuff. So a lot of the villagers were very upset, very, agitated, because it put a wrench in their subsistence plans. So yeah, I think just the nature of the crime and the publicity that it got, I think that they were just trying to make an example out of him.
I don't, it wasn't really up to us though to render judgment on Teddy,
Sure.
nor to offer any sort of, opinion on his sentence. Um, I think that is the job of the courts, and that's the job of the judge, to apply his sentence. I think what we question is whether or not he should have been tried at all in this imposed Western colonial system, judicial system. Um, and because it doesn't look anything like uh, the Inupiaq judicial system. If this would have happened 100 years ago, he would have been put on trial, and the entire village would have come together and collectively decided what to do and what his sentence was. And they would have taken into account how he grew up. Everyone would have known him, right? And the flip side of that coin is for a crime like this, very likely he would have been banished, which when up north, banishment equals death. You can't survive on your own. That's you can't survive in this harsh environment alone. So um, I think that is like the bigger question that we were kind of, trying to provoke a conversation around, is just, does this, even some version of the existing Western system, um, does it serve rural Alaska Native villages? He didn't get a trial by his peers if you look at the definition of a trial by their peers, right? Your jury needs to be made up of people who live within a 50-mile radius, and they didn't. So um I guess that's the bigger question, more so than like, was the sentence fitting?
Well, yeah, I think Kahlil addressed this to some extent in his communities, but the film stresses the importance of narrative in Inuit culture. And early on, we're told that stories keep us alive. But ironically, this film tells the story of an attempted murder. Do you see Teddy's story ultimately as one of salvation, or at least a recommendation to return to the old ways? And is it typical of Inuits to act as cultural corrective force like this?
Their actions and their characteristics, I guess, are all over the place. They sometimes help people, sometimes they're tricksters, sometimes they steal stuff, sometimes they are sinister. And it's all over the place. It's very complicated. So yeah, that would be my answer to that.
You never know
Yeah,
what you're
Yeah.
yeah.
just to repeat what I said earlier, the stories are meant to keep you on the right path. And I think that Inukkans, um, for example, right, we heard firsthand stories of um of people growing up hearing these stories, being out in on the tundra, days from home, and just the idea that there are Inyikans out there made them want to stay in camp and not go out at night, right? And so, you know, what happens if you go out at night in the middle of the night on the tundra? Well, you can get lost, right? And die. And so, you know, perhaps these stories were partly designed to keep you from getting lost, keep you from going out and freezing to death.
We're gonna come back to the jury of the peers in a minute, because that's something that I wanted to explore a little bit more, but a 99-year sentence is effectively life behind bars. From a legal perspective, how did Teddy's testimony play out in court? Was it viewed as a cultural defense or a mental health concern, or was it just ignored altogether?
Yeah, he, you know, I think he threw I think he threw his lawyer a curveball and just started talking about this stuff. I don't think she advised him to. I think he just went off script and just started talking about him. And she kind of just, I felt it kind of feels like she just had to play along. I think, I don't know if he hurt his case or helped it, but it kind of felt like he was just trying to speak his truth. So it's kind of, it goes into it's par for course for hunters to come, when they come back, if you see something strange, you immediately start talking about it to your community, to people around. You're like, I saw something out there. I saw this is where I saw it. And it's usually a way to keep people safe. It's usually like, I saw a bear, I had a bear charge me here, I saw a pack of 30 wolves here, the ice was bad here, you know. So you would always just kind of inform people what your experience was out in the country right away. And that's what it felt like he was doing to me. Yeah.
Point of clarity, we discussed that here watching the documentary. Did Teddy say that he thought that the buffaloes were Inyikans when he fired on them?
He ultimately didn't know what was real. I feel like whatever he experienced out in those mountains kind of tore a hole in his reality. Because here you are your whole life and you hear about these stories, you hear about these things, and it's always just been a story. There he is on foot, quiet. Most people who are out there in the country this time, you're out in the tundra, out in the Kobuk River Valley, they're in boats, they're in snow machines, they're in four-wheelers, they're in airplanes. All these things are very loud. You can hear them coming miles away. If you're on foot and trying to hide, you're moving very quietly. And so that's why a majority of the people up north think that he possibly did and could have had an encounter, because the fall time is when we have the most sightings. That is the most sightings of these beings, always in the fall. And it's mostly the majority in the fall. And so yeah, I think he did experience something out there. And I think that it tore a hole in his reality. And when the buckles came knocking, maybe he didn't know what was real anymore.
I think doesn't he he addressed this in court, which is that, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here. It wasn't that that they were Inyikans, that the Buckle brothers were Inyikans, but he thought that the Inyikans had been messing with them, right? They had been making, you know, following him and whispering and walking past his tent, and so he didn't know whether or not they were still messing with him, right? And this was somehow connected with them. That was the explanation that he gave.
Are there any kind of precedents or any comparable cases, either inside or outside Indigenous context, where they've presented a supernatural or culturally rooted belief in court?
The only one that I've ever heard of is this documentary that's on Hulu as well. It's called Sasquatch. And it has to do with Humboldt County in California. Hippies, machine guns, marijuana grows, Sasquatch, murder. Pretty kind of close, kind of similar. The funny thing is the guy who wrote that story is from Anchorage as well. Yeah, so we got the market cornered on cryptid murder shows. But yeah, that's the only other one I've ever heard of.
Yeah, I've seen that, and I didn't make the connection until you mentioned that. And yeah, I see that,
Yeah.
and as a folklorist, I'm going to keep coming back to to the traditional narratives here. Another sort of question about your grandfather's stories, really. That early on you mentioned that the Inuktitut and humans at one point lived together until quote unquote blood was spilled. Are there any details about this? Were the Inuktitut harmed, or did they go into hiding because they had done something? Are there any details about this?
If you listen to my audiobook on Audible original Midnight Sun, the whole thing starts off with the origin story that every single Inuit group has. And it was Inuktitut and Inupiaq lived together side by side. They were friendly with each other. And then one summer day, Inuktitut family went to Inupiaq family. The adults were talking in the tent. When outside the tent, they heard a scream. And the Inuktitut man ran out because he recognized the scream as his son. He ran out and he saw that a loose sled dog had killed and eaten his son because he was so small. And the stories is Inuktitut are very, very, very strong, like physically strong, about as tall as a bow. Very strong. When he heard that, when he saw that the dog ate his son, he tore it apart with his bare hands. And because of the Inupiaq's carelessness, he told him and the other people, they decided they won't ever be with us and ever again. And that the dog is what is the blood that was shed, the son. And they decided to go out to the mountains. So a lot of these stories revolve around this area of Alaska, where in the Brooks Range, these 3 large national parks, it's full of mountains and trees and animals and plants and berries, and there's all sorts of ways to live up there. Migratory birds, lots of fresh water, caribou herds, moose, all that. So that's the origin story of them, though.
Thank you. Thank you.
One of the things that you talk about is the spiritual significance of Smith's beliefs. How do you feel that the Western justice system handled this testimony in light of the importance to your culture of what he said?
Oh, I don't know. I think they just were following orders and just falling in line. It seems like a natural thing for them to be like, oh, okay, that doesn't belong in the court of law. This is a serious place where we talk about serious matters, and that none of that has any room for it. But I just wonder, is the American justice system, is the one size fits all American justice system, does it work for a place as big and wild as Alaska? And I don't think it does. So yeah.
The film concludes with the idea that your great grandfather's stories have been quote unquote vindicated. Can you elaborate on that, or why these stories, not just Teddy Smith's story or the stories of the Buckles, but your culture stories, why they are being vindicated through this?
Just because I've really studied my great grandfather's stories, and in his stories and in all Inuit storytelling and indigenous storytelling, really, there's always a sliver of truth. There's always a sliver of truth in there, and somewhere in there, there's a sliver of truth. And where in the story is that sliver? That was my thing. These are things that we've talked about, these creatures, these beings, our culture, my culture has talked about this for, hundreds of thousands of years, hundreds, tens of thousands of years. It's just one of those things where it's one of the most well-known modern encounters in my area. And this story was just kind of legendary in my area of the world. It's just an unbelievable story of survival. The way the Buckles got out of there, that normally doesn't happen. It's usually you hear about them finding the bodies. You don't, especially the way it went down. That's one of the last things you have to worry about when you're out in the middle of nowhere in the country, is someone else trying to shoot you. Usually, if you're worried about the weather, you're worried about the cold, the wind, the rivers, you're worried about bears and wolves and all sorts of other things, but you're not worried. Usually the last thing on your mind is someone going to shoot you. So
Yeah. We've kind of touched on about the jury pool, and I know he filed an appeal based on jury selection and everything. From y'all's perspective, does this case expose broader problems with ensuring fair trials in remote Indigenous communities?
Kahlil, you want to?
I mean, yeah, I kind of touched on that. There's a there's a movement. There's we spoke with an attorney, Megan Topkak, who is working with a group of people to try to bring tribal courts to rural Alaska and villages, because this the present judicial system that tried Teddy was imposed upon the native people of Alaska, right? It came with all the other things that the Western world brought, and it doesn't reflect how the justice would have been served 100 years ago, pre-contact, right? So there's a belief with that I align with it. These that tribes really need to be able to try their own cases, and there are a lot of complications that come with that, especially when you involve non-native, non-tribal members, as is the case here, where you have the two Buckle brothers who were white. You introduce some complications, but I think that it's important that tribes are able to try their own and decide the fates of their own citizens. Uh, so yeah, I think that that's a direction that we're moving slowly, but I think it's a necessary direction.
From a filmmaker's perspective, were there sensitive issues that you had to be careful about, or were there cultural details that you chose not to show out of respect for the community? I'm thinking about the images of partial images of Teddy's mother, and many indigenous cultures showing the corpse of a female particularly is taboo. I was wondering if you had to deal with any of that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of native tribes that have that belief, and in Alaska, I haven't really heard of that up here. It's not as much of a. It's such a harsh place to live. I think we're pretty comfortable with it. With Inupiaq people love true crime. We're very accustomed to the harshness of the world, just because it's a harsh place to live. And back in the day, we used to bury our dead above ground, and we would live underground.
Yeah.
That's the way we lived. It was the warmest way to live up north. Now we live above ground and we bury our dead below ground. So, that's we couldn't tell the story of what happened with Teddy without talking about his mother and alleged possible matricide. We couldn't. There's no way around it because that was the thing that set the whole story off. So talking about that part of the story with as much respect and sensitivity as we could, while at the same time we're making a documentary, we're making a true crime doc.
Yeah.
There's just some things it's the nature of the beast, so if it was an owl, there's a weird stuff about owls that people, like if you guys know, but and this was just more of it's one of those things that we couldn't tell the story without talking about what happened with his mother.
Yeah.
So that was the toughest part of the story for me to tell. There was a lot of sage. There was a lot of sage involved, after going through all those photos and, it was a lot. But it was part of the story.
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay. Was there any tension between how the local community understood justice and how the state court delivered justice in this case?
There's always kind of been a push and pull between the villagers and the judicial system. Alaska doesn't have a law school. A lot of Alaska Native people, their only participation in the judicial system is on the receiving end of punishment. I'm not as familiar with the way the system works as other people, other Americans, I guess. Unfortunately, there's just a lot of acceptance these days of like, what else can you do? This is just the law. This is the way that works. Like Kahlil said, back in the day, we had the tribal justice of what we would do. And then right after that, when Alaska was a territory, they had a roaming circuit court judge who would, instead of trying to make all the villagers go to the hub town, do the big trial, the big courtroom, he would fly to the village and they would handle their business. Was that a better way? I don't know. But it was a way that that existed before this. I'm not sure. Maybe it was better. I don't know. But seems like it makes more sense than what we got right now. But I'm not sure. I just hope that people who are much smarter than me talk about this issue with the way the justice system is played out in Alaska. I'm not saying I want Teddy to get out of jail. This isn't serial. This is I think that he deserves to be in there, but the way it went down is a point of contention.
Well, thank you. This has been a wonderful discussion, and it's a fascinating story. And I want to thank you both for your time and for joining us, and my colleague Deborah Rowell. We encourage everyone to check out the documentary Blood and Myth on Hulu, September 4th. It starts September 4th. And if you're in the area, come visit us here at the USC Lancaster Native American Studies Center, or visit us online at nativeamericanstudies.org. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. Hope you have a good day.
Thank you, guys.
So much. Take care.